Board members, if we can get you to take your seat, we'll get started here. I'm glad we had a much welcome break. Board members, where we're at, we skipped over Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones. We had kind of a time certain. We're privileged to have with us today Representative Pulsifer. This is an information item, not action. And so we want to keep that in mind, but certainly there's some time for some questions and that. And just to help you understand a little bit of background on this, as Representative Pulsifer was bringing this up to the legislators' attention, and that I've been watching and tracking this, and I thought, well, thank you for doing this, but what can we do as the State Board of Education, and how come we're not doing our part? And an opportunity we have to do on our part is some actionable items that's after this, but I think there's some background here that will help you with these proposed actionable items that's on our agenda. And I took the liberty to not put them in committee because of the time side of things. If after representatives' presentation and that, and then we get into our actionable items, this was accelerated for several reasons. One is it still goes through the process of rules and all that, but it gets something in our LEA's hands by January 1. And they're asking, what do we do? How do I, what? Is there a policy? And so this kind of helps support the need that the LEAs have, but it doesn't go to the full extent of what Representative Pulsifer is doing on the legislature. So that's why we've tied these two together. And so again, this is an informational item, and we'll turn the time over to the good representative for bringing this. And I'm not sure how, Angie, are you going to run this, or?
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Superintendent of Policy, Angie Stelling. So I've got my computer here. We were having some technical difficulties. And so Representative Pulsifer is going to do her presentation, and then I'll be here to support on the rules.
Okay. Representative Pulsifer, time is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me today. I appreciate it. This has been such a great opportunity to work on this issue, which is of great importance in our state to our young people. And of course, what we're talking about here is vaping and e-cigarettes. And during the summer, there was a working group. We appreciated Patty for being on the working group, and it included many legislators and many people from the State Department of Education and so on. And we had the opportunity to have presentations from the Department of Health, but also from 5 school districts that gave us information about what's happening in our schools in regard to vaping. And we also had some students come and do a presentation. It was just awesome. And out of that, this is just a little, shows some trends that are alarming in regard to vaping in our schools that was presented from school districts. And let's see, come on, not that. There, okay. All right, what we found, this is some information. What we found is the substances, and this is from the SHARP survey, the substances with the highest 30-day youth use rate in Utah, 6th, 8th, 10th, 12th grades combined. You can see almost 10% have used it in the last 30 days. And if you put a number to that, you'll see that that's 30,000 students in Utah. That's a lot of students. And this is a very harmful, addicting substance. And we see marijuana, almost 20,000. Alcohol is 17. And again, you look at the trends in terms of 30-day use e-cigarettes over the last years from 2011 to 2019, it just keeps climbing. And that's very alarming. Why are kids vaping? This was interesting from many different sources. We learned that it's the popular thing to do. Role models glamorize vaping, peer pressure, stress reliever, anxiety, depression, lack of meaningful relationships, They don't know or believe the consequences, and the parents don't know what's wrong. So we looked at that to try to understand what we could do to help students to lessen this attractiveness to students. Again, from the Sharp survey, this was interesting. This is looking at students who feel left out. We're looking for reasons and causes. As we saw in the last slide, students feel sometimes like they're left out, and this is students that felt isolated from others, and you can see in that how that is up to 20% of students in our state. And then when we were able to take and look at the just those who had used e-cigarettes in the last 30 days, how many of those, how did they respond to the questions about social isolation? And you can see that of those that use e-cigarettes, it increases, the use of e-cigarettes increases the more they feel social isolation. If you look at marijuana use, you see the same trend. If you look at alcohol use, you see the same trend. And then we know that youth indicating suicide attempts in the past years also there's a large percentage of our students. So what we came up with in our group was several bills, because we were trying to look at this statewide, and one bill was a tax bill which would impose an excise tax, and that's being run by another legislator. There was also a bill that's passed committee that would address the problem with vape shops attracting, soliciting, and selling to minors. And so that bill has already passed, and it is a committee bill for the next year. An access bill, this bill has not gone to committee yet, but it would address the easy access of vape products from shops even other than vape shops. And then the education bill, which we'll talk about, and then a resolution. So out of this working group, we came up with these 5, and it's important to know because some people say, but you need to keep kids from getting it in the first place, and so some of the bills do that. And so the education bill, we're trying to do 2 things. One is to establish clear, consistent policies for vaping on school property, and you probably are aware many superintendents say we don't know what to do. Many principals and even teachers are not sure how to handle the situation of vaping in the classrooms and what do they do with them, and especially the devices. What do we do with the devices? We have a box. What do we do with them? So we wanted to clarify those definitions for vaping devices and nicotine delivery systems, which we've done, and then asking LEAs to adopt policies for confiscation and destroying e-cigarettes, vaping devices, and products. And then the schools will continue to turn devices over to law enforcement if there's suspicion of a controlled substance. Because we have in our law right now that tobacco products we wouldn't turn over to law enforcement, but anything, and some vaping devices include other things, other drugs, because they can deliver many, many different drugs, and if there's a suspicion, we would then turn those over to law enforcement. And then, so what I will wait, and Angie will be covering what we worked on in the language to address that. And what we would like to do is have the language that you're looking at today be similar or the same as the language that comes in the bill. And the bill will come to committee in November. So if you look at that and you feel good about it, that will be the similar, if not same language that will help accomplish these. And then also in the bill itself, it will ask the Board of Education to establish a library of recommended best practices for cessation interventions. We know that our juvenile justice program asks LEAs to handle whatever happens with the students. So what we want to do is to share among the state the things that work well. Because I've heard stories, in some cases they say this product is amazing and this works well. In other cases, students have reported to me that they went to a vaping cessation. They were caught vaping. They went to something and came out laughing, that it was a joke. So what we want to do is have really high quality. And we don't necessarily want to tell LEAs what to do, but we want to be a resource. So that's what that is about, is it being a resource for them of best practices so that we can find the things that are working out really, really well. The second part we want to do is increase student awareness, and I know that you've already done some work in regard to that. The healthy curriculums that you looked at and approved for this in the last few months included vaping, where they hadn't before. So that was really helpful. What the bill does too is there's in code, there's Botvin curriculum that we ask schools to do a module in 7th or 8th grade, also in 9th or 10th grade. So what we want to do is add one to 4th or 5th grade. So we can also have an age-appropriate curriculum in elementary, because kids are starting this very early and they need to have that good information. What we want to do is teach kids the dangers of this. And then a third part, it would be better for everyone if we could get kids not to start in the first place. So what we are looking at why kids start and looking at the data, what the data shows us about things that cause kids to engage in these harmful practices like vaping and alcohol and other things. So what the bill is going to do is ask students each school to create a plan to address the causes of student use of tobacco, alcohol, and electronic cigarette products and other controlled substance through promoting positive behavior such as pro-social interventions, opportunities to help students feel included and increase connectivity. This plan could be clubs, programs, pro-social opportunities, service opportunities, so on. The plan would be created under the direction, in each school, a plan for the school would be created in each school under the direction of the principal with help from students and input from the school community council. And I'm aware that many schools already have this. They're already doing it. That's awesome. And those who aren't, then they would have this opportunity to create something in our school. If we can reach out to kids and help them to be in a place where they don't, their peers, the peer pressure is to do positive things and not negative things. If we can help teach them pro-social behaviors and things that will help them do positive things, not negative things, they won't start on these harmful behaviors, and then we won't be spending our time trying to help them get off. So, this is trying to put the guardrails on the top of the hill. And then each school, a specialist or specialists at each school would administer the program and be paid a $3,000 stipend. And then an additional $1,000 would be provided to administer the plan. And then, so the schools would develop this plan. They would submit the plan to their LEA board, local school board, and the school board would approve it, monitor it, and review it annually, and then ensure to the state board that the school has a plan. So what we want this to do is be very local controlled with, little if no instructions from the state level, because we believe that a locally devised plan will be much more effective than something that we might. There's many programs out there that are fantastic that a school could use. They could make up their own, whatever feels like the right thing for their community and their plan. So that's what the bill does, and I just am thrilled to be working with you on some of this language so we can get started sooner than later. Anyway, any questions?
Board members, questions? Comments? Board Member Lear.
Thank you for talking about this, and Jenny's convinced me that, because she's a boots-on-the-ground person, that this is a real problem. But what I'm concerned about is the funding. I am so frustrated with schools being the center of solving all social problems. And I admit that students spend a lot of time there and think it's a place where kids are. But we just can't, we don't have the money to do it. So if you're committed to making sure the funding stays in the bill, I will support you 115 and 80%.
If the funding comes out of the bill, that portion goes.
And that portion meaning?
Meaning the portion where the money, the portion of the schools adopting a plan. Because
Okay.
I don't want to have an unfunded mandate
That's-
to locals.
But I'm very, very concerned about it. And again, though I completely support the effort, we cannot be responsible for one more social program.
Right.
That is admittedly a problem. Thanks.
Yes, I appreciate that so much. I really do, and that is my concern. The money is attempting to come out of the excise tax, so it will be, that's what the plan is, and that's still being worked out. If somewhere at the end of the day, there's no money, the plan, that part will go out of the bill, because it is not intended to be an unfunded mandate, and it's not intended to be, and I agree with you, I don't like schools to have to deal with all these. The trouble is, they already are. And so we're trying to help them do it in a more proactive way, because,
Money.
and helping them, absolutely.
Proactive way possible. Thank you.
Board Member Cannon?
Thank you. I appreciate your being Johnny on the spot to address something that's really an issue of our time. My question just regards this rule that we are asked to look at today, and it says LEA policies governing electronic cigarette products in school. And it's very generic that we do a policy, but you described having some kind of teaching going on with the kids at the different levels, all the way down to fourth or fifth grade. So can you tell us a little bit how that fleshes out within, I don't see it here in the rule.
No, yeah.
Where would we find it in the bill?
So that's in the bill. Yes, please. Yeah. What we are attempting to do, and I think what the state board is attempting to do, is put the part about what LEAs do with devices and do with students once they're caught. And that would be what you're adopting today. The other part, the education piece, is in the bill, but not in your state rule. And so you can look and see, now this is the bill as it was in October, and a lot has changed, but I don't think this part's changed very much.
So there is a difference. The proposed rules that's before the board today does not include everything that's being,
Right.
because we're not sure exactly how that's going to play out.
Right.
So the request to staff that put a lot of time in this to say, let's keep it simple and direct, and then knowing that sometime after this legislation is complete, there most likely will be an amendment to it.
And
But
it would
this
come back,
this
okay.
gives those LEAs simple direction,
Right.
a simple solution that they have control over to address only a portion of what is really happening in the school, which is basically, I'm not speaking to the motion or anything yet, but it's, the bottom line is, no, we don't want them on our campuses, in our schools, and yes, you can get rid of them, and this is how you can do it. And
Right.
kept it very, very simple with minimum complication. Now, the bill, once it's all done and goes into statute, which will be later defined, then we will most likely come and revisit this. But
Right.
this-
So there's the three parts. The first part of the bill is, what do we do when we catch kids with vaping? And that's more what yours, and that part of the bill, and that's what the board rule talks about. The other piece is increasing the education to kids and creating the plan. Those two are the second and third parts, and they're not in your state board rule, but they are in the bill.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Board Member Scott Hansen?
First, just applause for bringing this forward. I think I think those Sharps numbers we looked at are probably well understated from what's really going on in the schools. My question has to do a little bit with marijuana, and that was number 2 on the list. And I know that THC is in a lot of these vape products, and so that's kind of getting mixed up. But I worry a little bit when we lump marijuana into other controlled substances. We talk about alcohol, we talk about tobacco, we talk about vaping now. I think that it might be time to break that out because I'm not sure that kids see that as in the same category as hard drugs and other things that might be in that controlled substances, and maybe talk more specifically about that as we, deal with the issue. So that would be just a suggestion to look at breaking that out and kind of dealing with that on its own rather than lumping it into other controlled substances.
Thank you.
Board Member Bolter?
Yes, I've got a question, and I think hopefully Angie will be able to answer it. Thank you, by the way, for bringing this forward. In our health standards, do we specifically talk about e-cigarettes? I can't seem to remember. There's some nodding of heads, so we were trying to look it up just now. But that would be at least a good way to get the information out there, the education out there, and there wouldn't be an extra cost associated with it because they've already out there. And if perhaps we could just look and see if there's any mention of specifically e-cigarettes. Because I agree, there does need to be a separation.
Yes, you want somebody to, Board Member Bolter, would you like somebody to come but what I'm hearing is yes, they
Yes,
were
okay.
recently added to include electronic cigarette products. And so,
Okay.
yes.
Perfect. I just couldn't remember.
Okay, any other questions or comments for the representative on this? Again, thank you for coming today and enlighten us on this. I'm sure we're going to be tracking it. Did you have some other comments? Or?
No, just thank you so much. I think this is great that you're taking some action today, and we'll just, do this as fast as we can, and we're trying to get this approved as a committee bill in this month so that we can move it as fast as we can through the legislature as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Angie, this is a little bit of an oddity, and I took the privilege as a chair to put this on the agenda with the vice chair's consent to a certain degree, I guess. Can you give some background before we get into this of what and how, what your assignment was that will help
Yes.
bring context to this, especially the parts about keeping it simple but making it accurate
Yes.
and what the process would be like? Thank you.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you. As Representative Pulsifer mentioned, there's a portion of her bill, and I'm displaying it right now. It's those lines 324 through 329, which in many ways our rule has taken, and since that November meeting, we've received a lot of feedback. I know Representative Pulsifer's also received a lot of feedback from the Department of Public Safety and other stakeholders on this language. And so you'll see that the language that's here on lines 324 through 329 of her bill are very similar to the language that is now in this new rule 624. So Chair Huntsman and others, and I would say I've been hearing feedback from other advocates saying, what are we going to do about our students now? Can we wait until the session to give support to our LEAs to feel comfortable? I think Representative Pulsifer, as well as Superintendent Dixon and I, as we went out, for example, on the listening tour, we've heard from LEA officials that they're very concerned about vaping, and they've been questioning what their authority is to do in their power with their policies. And your AAG, Brian Quessenberry, helped do some research, and together we feel confident that as long as an LEA has a policy in place that explicitly sets the expectations of what is allowed on campus and what is not, and if certain items are found on campus, what is going to happen with those items. As long as the LEA is very clear about that in their policies, they have the authority right now to handle electronic cigarettes, tobacco, alcohol, et cetera. And so what we're doing as a board, I think what Chair Huntsman has asked, is that we codify in rule, essentially, like I stated, what is going to be in Representative Pulsifer's bill, to reinforce the authority of the LEAs to establish policies governing possession and confiscation and disposal of electronic cigarette products. And that would include, the definitions are included in here because it is much broader than just the device, or it could include the juice, or it could include add-ons, et cetera. And so one important thing that both the legislation and the rule do is give more clarity to what we mean by electronic cigarette product. There's been confusion about whether electronic cigarettes are limited to those that have nicotine or THC, or whether it's as broad as other substances. So you'll see that the rule defines electronic cigarette as an electronic device used to deliver or capable of delivering vapor containing nicotine or other substance to an individual's respiratory system. And it includes the liquid, it includes the pre-filled electronic cigarette product, et cetera. So then down below, you'll see that we ask LEAs to adopt policies. And I should state that many LEAs already have policies regarding this. So this has not necessarily been a problem that all districts or charters are worried about, because I think some districts feel like they have good policies in place. And so this is by no way a statement that there are districts that don't already have their policies. They do. I think the question has been from some of our LEAs whether they have the authority to confiscate and then dispose of the products. So the rule would state that they develop a policy for responding to possession or use of electronic cigarette products by a student on school property, and that include the procedures for confiscation, as well as requiring school personnel to dispose of or destroy the confiscated electronic cigarette products. Now, this language in blue is actually language that I believe Representative Pulsifer plans to also include in her bill, the subsection 3 language. This is language that the Department of Public Safety asked for us to include, which states that a school official may release a confiscated electronic cigarette product suspected to contain illegal controlled substances or used to consume illegal controlled substances to law enforcement as part of an investigation or action in lieu of disposing of or destroying the cigarette products. So it doesn't require them to hand it over to law enforcement, but it does signal to them that that is an option, that they could hand those over to law enforcement if they suspect there's illegal substances in there. Also, one clarification we were asked to provide yesterday is, and I believe that anytime we ask for policies, the board does, it doesn't necessarily mean there has to be a standalone policy for each rule, but we wanted to make sure that it was clear that an LEA may incorporate their policy on these electronic cigarettes as part of their search and seizure policy, which is related to the next rule that's coming up, or their student discipline or other policy. So they're not required to create a standalone new policy solely on electronic cigarettes. And that's the rule, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Maybe it'd be appropriate to get the rule on the table and then
And it's draft
Act accordingly.
2, not draft 1.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
I move that we approve R 277624, electronic cigarette products in schools, draft 2, on first and final reading.
I'm writing it down. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Do you want to speak to the motion, or has it been plenty? It's been okay with discussion to the motion? Board Member Lear?
I just have a question. Because as you note, it's kind of unusual for schools to confiscate items and then be able to destroy them. Even though we all agree it's insidious and nasty and not good for kids, but it's still family property, and it's kind of unusual. I'm wondering if you have a plan, and I'm wondering if it should be in the rule, and that's just one aspect that's hard. I think it's also, as you also note, there's a lot of pieces to what might be vaping products, and that I think they're not going to be well understood by 160 or 80 LEAs. So I wonder if you have plans to provide some model language for schools, for LEAs.
And thank you for that question. We actually have been researching some other policies in other states, what districts have related to electronic cigarette confiscation and disposal. And so Brian and staff, like Brian Olmstead, Rhett, Patty, we that is one of our next steps, is to work on some potential model language, not necessarily a standalone model
Right.
policy, but some elements of model language that LEAs could use, because there are a couple of options they could use related to this language. Not all LEAs will want to do the exact same thing.
Right.
So yes, we are working on that. We've done some research. We just didn't have time to get it done today. But if this passes, we'll be happy to work on some model provisions and policies for LEAs.
Quick follow-up to
Yeah,
that.
follow up.
Do you think it'd be helpful to put it in the rule, or what, or do you think will it be well advertised enough that LEAs will know they don't have to come up with this language, which is admittedly complicated and has some legal connotations to it? They wouldn't have to do it on their own.
We plan to do it, and whether you want to signal and require the superintendent to create model policies, you could do that. We don't normally incorporate by reference model policies. We just do that standalone as staff. And you'll see in the next one, for example, there's a rule, and there are model policies, but you're not required to approve or adopt the model policies as
Which
the
I don't
board.
wanna
So
do.
we are working on it. We've done the research. We just wanted to wait to see if this rule passed before we actually worked on the model policy. So
Let's-
we'll be happy to announce that, send an email like we did, do you remember, with the appropriate behavior policy that came out recently related to immunity and
Yes,
the-
sort of.
the code of
Let's just see
conduct.
what happens. I'm not going to propose an amendment right now, but I really would encourage you to get that information out to LEAs, because it is
And it was one of
complicated.
the next to-dos, as
Mm-hmm.
we've reached out to stakeholders, to superintendents and the rest of them. They said, so, a model policy? And it's like, okay, that's on the horizon. Then the question I had was, are you guys wanting to put one together yourself, or should we reach out to people and say, this is what it might look like? So I think there's going to continue to be more collaboration besides what's happened with the Department of Public Safety and others to these rules, to get that model policy out really quite quickly, because the idea was to try to get something that they can act on by
Right.
and use by the first of the year. So that really gives us like a month and a half to knock out.
Yes,
Is that
that is
correct?
our plan also, was to have the model policy language ready by the time the effective date of this rule would take place. So the earliest this rule could take effect is January 7th, January 8th. So that is our goal also, to have that ready by the beginning of the year.
Okay. Board Member Scott Hansen?
Yeah, thank you. Carol anticipated one of my questions, because I know some of these kids have quite a sizable investment in their vape devices. I mean, they can cost them hundreds of dollars, I think. So that'll be important to make sure that's broadcast clearly to them prior to this going into effect. The other questions I had were, if we're going to potentially not destroy these but pass them on to law enforcement, we'll need something in that model policy, maybe about kind of a chain of evidence thing, so that's very tightly controlled. I assume the reason to pass it on would be to maybe bring some action against the kids, and sometimes it's THC that are in these, but they can also be used for meth or other things, so it could be quite serious. So I'd hope that that's included. One more question, though, on line 42, that blue language that was here. It says, and we've used this a lot, I think, in previous rules, illegal controlled substances. Are we going to get into a gray area now with medical marijuana and THC being not necessarily illegal in all cases, but controlled? I think getting rid of illegal might be, and just say controlled substances would be a reason to seize those and pass it on. That may be a safer way to go.
Well,
Don't know
in-
if you have any comments on that. The language came from somewhere else, I understand.
Yeah, and I do actually have some feedback. As we were talking to our colleagues at the Department of Public Safety, they stated that often schools do not hand over or do not refer marijuana use or possession in schools to law enforcement. They almost treat marijuana possession similar to tobacco, like you stated. So that, I guess that's the question. Are you, if they do have medical marijuana card and they are allowed to have that, and it's being treated the same way that like an inhaler or any other medical substance, approved, that this would go to say keeping the illegal controlled substance, because the legal controlled substance, maybe you wouldn't want to refer to law enforcement because there is some authority to have it. So I don't know if I answered your question. I probably would keep illegal, but I defer to you all
Okay.
'Cause
I
it
think
could
Brian
be-
or not, yeah.
Yeah,
AG Quisenberry, do you have a comment on that?
Okay, there we go. I was just going to comment on the cost of the vaping devices. I did research and I couldn't find any cases that litigated the taking of a vaping device, and I found that kind of interesting, trying to figure out why not, because I was under the impression that they were rather expensive. After doing some research, and of course I don't have any personal experience with this, but there's different kinds, of course. A disposable vape is $3 to $7. A pod system vape is $15 to $50. A vape pen is between $15 to $35. So the typical cost of a vape is between $20 to $40, according to internet research that I did. A pack of cigarettes is about $7. And in case you're interested, in Australia, it's about twice that cost for a vaping device, if you have a chance to go there. But my point is that vaping devices aren't excessively expensive in relation to a pack of cigarettes. Certainly, no, I couldn't find anything that were hundreds of dollars. And that might explain why no one was willing to spend thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars on legal fees to litigate potential constitutional rights on the taking of their kid's vaping device on a school ground.
Board Member Jenny Earl.
Yeah, that kind of answered my question, because I was thinking this has got to be going on right now. I mean, they're destroying devices as they come in, it sounds like. Is that a common practice?
I don't know that it's common because.
Oh, okay, that's,
I wouldn't say it was common.
Oh.
There's not much information.
Thank you, Brian.
Sorry, we don't have much data on what's being done. I think there's efforts trying to turn things over to law enforcement. I think some law enforcement are taking the devices. So I haven't heard much data on what's happening
okay,
to
that's what I was
devices.
curious, if this was something that, was going on, or if there does need to be a concern. It sounds like the cost being less than we think would not be a, prohibitive thing, so.
Part of the concern is that often these vaping devices, it's hard to know what substance is in them. So if they do have nicotine, or if they do have THC, or one of the illegal controlled substance, they would be clearly something you could take and destroy, regardless of whether you had a policy there. You could hand it over to law enforcement, because minors in possession of those tobacco or other substances are illegal.
Right.
But LEs don't have testing kits. They don't have the money for the testing kits. And so this would clearly state that the possession of the devices, or even if they don't contain nicotine or illegal controlled substance, that they are not welcome on the campus, and if you bring them, they're going to be confiscated and destroyed. And the legislation, there's other legislation that is seeking to broaden the definition of electronic cigarette to not just those that have nicotine in them, but also any other substance, any other vapor, because what we're seeing is the negative consequences are not just limited to those with nicotine in them or THC, but also just the vapor in and of themselves, or the flavored
right.
juices, et cetera. And
Okay.
so,
Okay.
and that's been and that's why I think some LEAs have been hesitant, and we're trying to send that statement that if they have a policy that clearly states they're not welcome on campus, they're going to be confiscated, they're going to be destroyed, then students and parents will be on notice to not bring them on school grounds.
Okay. So, and then just, can I ask?
A follow-up?
one more? Yeah, just real quick, and I know you know this, but any kind of a model program, I guess, we put together, we want to make sure we're not doing overexposure, but we're doing appropriate, so that we're not actually exposing kids to more or encouraging something, but, which we've learned from previous drug and substance abuse programs, that certain things don't work well, so,
No.
thank you.
Board Member Cindy Davis.
If a student is vaping via, like with a phone or a laptop, does that fall into the definition of line 17, an electronic device used to deliver or capable of delivering vapor? And will we be confiscating phones and laptops and destroying those?
That's a good question. This definition is broad enough that anything, whether it's like, I guess they put them in sweatshirts or hats, there's lots of different ways these devices are used, and I guess the question would be, and I don't know, is how, if that could be unhooked from the phone or the laptop, so that the portion that they're destroying is just the add-on, and others may know more about how that works.
Anthony?
I think if that is the case, we need to clarify that in this rule, because the language here is basically any electronic device or any part of an electronic device. I mean, it seems that, I'm asking this because a local board member asked me this question: can we confiscate a phone or a computer that's being used to vape? So that's a big deal. And I think we just need some clarity.
And I'm a little confused on it because you can plug the device into your car and the actual vaping device into your car, and to get the power, the the source of electricity to make it happen. And I don't see cars getting confiscated. I think there's some practical things that are going to happen here with the devices, and so it's kind of hard. And that's one of the challenges with the vaping world right now is where does it end? Because they're pushing that way out to some very unique, creative devices to make it happen. And so I think there's some practical issues too. So I just don't see somebody confiscating the car because the cord's attached to it and vaping. So it's hard to put limitations. And as soon as we put a limitation on it, it might be, I can get around that because I'm hardwired into my car now. It's not a separated device. Hey, come get in my car because we're going to vape in it because nobody can take it. So that's why, as this was being kind of beat up, a device is a device. And it's similar to these devices are really conduits to make something happen. And it's the same as a syringe and a needle. You don't know what's in it, but it's a way of getting something a certain way into your system. And so that's kind of my concern, is putting those limitations out there of maybe the value of something or that device. I have a concern with that. Do you have a comment?
Yes, I just received some clarification from the back of the room that generally the phones and laptops are power charging devices. They aren't actually the device providing the vapor or delivering the vapor. So any device that's used to charge it, like a car, laptop, or phone, would not fall under this definition because it's not the phone that's providing the delivery of the vapor. It's just the power source to charge it.
Then do you have a follow-up?
It's right here. It says.
So I think maybe in lines 41 and 42, a school official may release a confiscated electronic cigarette product. I think the question is how we're defining product. It seemed really, really broad and could include that, but maybe I'm wrong and we just go with it and see what happens.
I guess I'm looking at electronic cigarette. It says it's the device that's used to deliver or capable of delivering vapor. It's not necessarily the power source, but it would have to be actually delivering the vapor. A component of that device, which again, I wouldn't say the power source, whatever it's used, is a component of it, or the accessory sold in the same package as the device. I don't anticipate iPhones or Samsungs packaging together with vaping devices anytime soon. So
Great.
our staff feels pretty confident that this does not reach the laptops, the cell phones, or the cars that charge the devices.
Thank you.
Chair,
Yes.
do you want to go ahead? Patty just had a clarification on the medical marijuana.
So, on the medical marijuana issue, that's not the appropriate way to deliver medical marijuana. And so it should not ever be in a vaping device because that's not the way it's delivered medically.
Okay, board members, we have a motion on the table, and that is that the board approve R277-624 electronic cigarette products in schools, draft 2, on final reading. Is there more discussion on this motion? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Voting is unanimous. Thank you. You want the Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
I'd like to move that we approve R277615, Standards and Procedures for Student Searches, Draft 1 on final reading.
Do we have a second? Second, Board Member Gravitt. Discussion to the motion. Seeing none, let's put it to a vote. The motion before the board is that the board approve R277-615 Standards and Procedure for Student Searches, Draft 1 on final reading. We'll put it to a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Voting was unanimous. Thank you. And board members, thank you for your patience of allowing this to be moved up on the calendar and on our agenda for calendaring purposes. Okay, Deputy Superintendent, thank you, Angie and staff, for all your last minute work. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, you're up.